guys, and welcome to a mini book review thingamabob that I'm doing. I don't know. I wanted to talk about a couple books that I read that I have a little bit of insight on because I can do an own voice review of it, and that is reading two books with asexual / demisexual characters in them. Either the protagonist or like the secondary main character type thing. For folks who may not know, hi, I'm Michaela. I identify as demisexual. If you don't know what that is, it's considered sort of on the asexual spectrum, where in general people have sexual attraction on two fronts. Either physical attraction, which is that guy has certain physical features that I find sexy, or an emotional attraction, which is I love this person and therefore I find them sexy. Demisexuals generally only feel the second form, which basically means that in order to feel sexual attraction at all, I need to have formed a close emotional bond with somebody. So a lot of times I would need to be somebody's friend first before I could even really think about kissing or anything like that. Outside of that, it's gross and yucky. Asexuals can feel no sexual attraction, full stop, doesn't happen. Some sexual attraction or limited sexual attraction. It depends on the person individually. So I'm just saying, hi, I identify as demi, which means I do feel sexual attraction, but only to people that I have formed close emotional bonds with. There are two books that I have read in the last week that either had an asexual or demisexual character in them, so I wanted to talk about them today. The first book I wanted to talk about actually is the one that has the demisexual character, and that is Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. I'll give you this guy. I will also probably put the thing up on the side where it talks about the book, so I'm going to put it down. Radio Silence is a little bit older now. It's been out for a couple of years. I picked it up from the recommendation of Kat from Paperback Dreams. She's obviously a person who super totes it. It is young adult. It is contemporary for sure. The asexual character is the second character, not the point of view character. He runs a YouTube channel that the protagonist is a fan of. He, for the most part, is just a friend of hers. He does have a sexual relationship with a longtime friend. It is a queer relationship. They are two men, which I appreciate the, representation there, along with the fact that you get the perspective from both his boyfriend, quote-unquote boyfriend, and himself, where he talks about sort of the way that he engages in those sorts of activities. The boyfriend confesses to the protagonist of this book that he feels like Alid isn't really into it, and he only says yes because the other person wants to do it, or that he's worried that he's going to pressure him to doing something he doesn't actually want to, or that he's been manipulating the situation in some way, which is something that I can relate to with partners that I have had. But that character, Alid, does end up having a conversation, although very briefly, with his partner that we are able to see, where he talks about his identity and what he sort of looks at that to be, which is demisexual. And that was a really good conversation and a really good representation on this part for demisexuality, because he was engaging in some activities, not necessarily full-on sex, but making out, those sorts of activities. And both people were not really sure if they were doing things the quote-unquote the right way, because there isn't that heated passion to it towards the activities themselves, but also just towards the other person. There wasn't like a physical sexual drive in the same capacity. I really enjoyed that representation, that people who identify as asexual or demisexual can still have a relationship. They aren't just sexless entities that float through life. Obviously, there are some folks who do identify as ace who may not want to have any sexual activity, including kissing of any kind. There are some who are okay up to a certain point, and all of that depends on the person. So if you are interacting with a person who you think might identify as ace or demi, it's always important to verify with them that they are comfortable doing what is happening, constantly ask for verbal reassurance that what's happening is okay for them. Obviously, there are folks who are quieter about what they like or don't like, and we always want to make sure that we are getting that verbal reassurance, which the boyfriend character in this definitely did. He said that he always asked multiple times during whatever they were doing, anytime they were going somewhere else, are you okay with this? Do you want to do this? Good representation there. So yeah, if you're looking for a book that has that representation where there is a relationship happening and the people involved are maybe on different ends of the spectrum, allosexual versus an asexual person, that's definitely a good book to point them to show an example of that. The next book that I wanted to talk about is Elatsoe by Darcy Little Badger. Again, I'm probably going to put the thing up to the side with all of the information, so I'm going to take the book and put it down, but look how pretty that cover is. This one I picked up partially because I'm personally trying to read more books by Indigenous authors this year, because it is a area that I definitely have been lacking in the past, where I have not read a lot of books by Indigenous authors, or many at all, that weren't like assigned to me for different reasons. I took a class on Indigenous culture in college where I was reading some, and I read the Diary of a Part-Time Indian in high school, but like of picking up my own books, I really hadn't been exposed to much Indigenous literature, which this is. Both the protagonist and the author are Indigenous. They are specifically Apache, Lipan Apache. So if you can go find somebody who is Apache, or at the very least an Indigenous voice talking about that aspect of the book, highly recommend looking into that for a review on that aspect. Again, I am very white, so I cannot talk about that, but I can talk about the asexual perspective here. This one, I have said to a lot of folks, is very good for kids who are coming out of young adult and moving into YA, because again, this is a YA title. There is no relationship aspect in like a romantic way in this. And the identification of the protagonist as asexual is really done by a secondary character who said, was inviting them to their wedding and said that they could bring a date, and made a little joke about it, like, I know you're asexual and that you probably don't want to bring a person, blah, blah, blah. That was a little bit weird. The joke that character made, I think they said something like, bringing a dog? Which was... It made sense with the character, because the protagonist here has a close relationship with her family dog, or ghost dog, as it is in this book, because there are supernatural elements. But outside of that, it is neither brought up nor discussed. I would like to say that it was nice to see a YA book where a boy and a girl are close friends, and there is no discussion of whether or not one or the other likes the other person, where they just get to be friends, they get to be people who support each other. There's no sexual tension in any way. That was very nice. So this book could be a good thing to hand to somebody who is younger but reading older and doesn't necessarily want to read all of the mushy-gushy stuff that happens in a lot of YA, because romance is very featured in YA books, and for a lot of folks I would say is probably one of the staple identifying landmarks of YA books, that there is a romance element, versus something like a middle grade, which may have a similar writing style or tone, that sort of thing. Obviously the characters in here are a little bit older, so YA versus middle grade, but even still, it didn't have that aspect to it, which I find in a lot of YA. There was no relationship at all for me to talk about, like how she would interact in that situation. But as far as just representation, acknowledgement of sexuality, acknowledgement of others, and acceptance of others of that sexuality, and then good representation of friendship in there across sexes. Not that queer stuff doesn't happen in other books as well, but like I appreciated seeing a boy and a girl being able to be friends, which doesn't happen so often. Are there books out there? Yes, of course, but I'm going to set that aside and say, yes, this is a good one. So if you have a younger one, or someone who is ace or demi, and they like reading YA, but they don't like reading all of the mushy-gushy romance stuff, this might be a good one to pick up for them. Outside of that, the only other book that I have read that has explicitly stated that it has asexual representation in it is Every Heart a Doorway by Shannon McGuire, and I read this with book club a couple years ago. So there is a book club discussion up on the channel if you would like to hear us talk about that. This is the only other book that I have read that explicitly states that there is asexual representation. The protagonist in this does communicate with another character that shows interest in them, that they don't really have sexual interest in other people. They aren't really looking to have that. She also doesn't seem to have a romantic interest in other people, which is another thing to talk about, asexual versus aromantic. You could be either, you could be both. That is a thing to discuss when you're talking about sexuality and relationships in your teenage years. You're coming into learning about those. This one is an adult fantasy, although I don't think there's anything necessarily in here that would put it too far outside of the realm of YA. There is a bit, it's a murder mystery, so there's a bit of violence, but not like overly gory violence necessarily. Dead bodies, but not necessarily like incredibly uncomfortable. So this might be another thing to pick up if that's something that you have a person who's interested in, if you're interested in it. But I am always looking for more recommendations of books that have asexual or demisexual characters in it. So if you guys have read anything that I have not, which pretty much is just to those 3 books, please leave it down below so that I can add it to my reading list, because it's something that I would like to see more. Obviously, seeing representation of your own experiences, your own life is affirming of that. It is helpful to anybody to be reading about what it feels like to be themselves, especially for folks that are in the asexual or demisexual spectrum. There is a lot of erasure in our field. People don't necessarily let us into the LGBTQ plus community because we don't have the same sexual experiences, but that A in LGBTQIA plus is for asexual. So it was nice to see some representation there. Give me the recommendations of more that I should read so that I can talk about that sort of thing and whether or not I feel like the representation is positive, negative, how that should go. If you are interested in my thoughts on those 2 books, outside of the asexual representation within them, I have done full reviews of them on my blog, which is listed down below as always, talking about more aspects of them, whether or not I would recommend them entirely as a book or not, who I think should read them or could enjoy them. Obviously, if I'm mentioning them here and I'm saying they're positive representation for asexuality, there's something that I think you should pick up, but just in case you want more thoughts on it or a more comprehensive view with the plot and all of that stuff, that's a good place to check out. And Gretchen and I will see you again soon. Bye.